The snow had fallen all day, silent and merciless, smoothing the wild land into a blank expanse that swallowed sound and color. By dusk, the air turned sharp as broken glass, and the wind carried a loneliness that cut deeper than hunger. Rowan Kane pushed his horse through the drifts with the weary precision of a man used to riding against the elements. He carried the solitude of 30 years in the set of his jaw, the creases etched at his brow, the way his shoulders leaned slightly forward as if bracing against blows no longer thrown. Handsome in a rugged, unadorned way, Rowan was not the sort women of town sought to soften. He was the figure they whispered about behind lace curtains, the one they called wild, stubborn, unclaimed. He had grown accustomed to being a rumor more than a man. By the time he reached the barn, lantern light flickering faint in the distance, the world had narrowed to the sound of his horse's labored breath. He swung the door open, expecting emptiness, just hay, wood, and the steady presence of his animals. Instead, the lantern beam fell upon a shape curled in the straw. For a moment, Rowan thought it was a ghost conjured by the storm. A slender body wrapped in worn deerskin, dark hair spilled across pale straw, lips parted slightly with the shallow rhythm of sleep. She seemed younger than him by years, but there was an oldness in the way she clutched herself, as if guarding something broken. His boots pressed against the straw, crunching softly. She stirred, her eyes opening wide, black as storm clouds, sharp as flint. Rowan froze, one hand on the lantern, the other instinctively lowering to the revolver at his hip, though he did not draw it. She did not flinch or flee. Instead, her gaze locked with his, steady and unyielding, and he felt the weight of it deep in his chest. "You're mine now," Rowan whispered before he knew why he spoke. The words startled even him, half a claim, half a vow, not born of conquest but of something stranger, something that had risen unbidden in that instant of recognition. His voice, hushed and gravelly, seemed swallowed by the rafters, yet it hung between them like smoke. The woman sat upright slowly, eyes wary, shoulders tense as if she might spring. Her breath puffed white in the cold air, and he saw how thin her blanket was, how her hands trembled though she tried to hide it. Rowan lowered the lantern, softening the glare. "I don't mean harm," he said, though he wasn't sure she believed. "Stay warm. That's all." She made no answer, only gathered the deerskin closer, turning her face slightly away. But Rowan saw her hunger in the tightness of her lips, the hollowness in her cheeks. He set the lantern on a beam and left without further word, the barn door closing with a sigh. Inside his cabin, Rowan paced before the fire. He had spoken foolishly. He had startled her with words that must have sounded like possession, when all he had meant was protection. But the truth lodged deep. For the first time in years, the loneliness gnawing at him felt less like emptiness, more like waiting. Sleep eluded him, and by dawn, when the storm still raged, he carried bread and a pot of beans to the barn. The woman was awake, eyes following him like a hawk's. He set the food down near her but did not approach closer. "Eat," he said simply. "No one will trouble you here." She looked at the food, then at him. Pride and mistrust warred in her gaze. At last, she pushed the plate slightly away, a small refusal. The rejection stung more than he expected. Rowan was no stranger to being turned aside. He had spent his life on the margins, too rough for polite company, too quiet for companions. Yet something about her refusal cut deeper. He almost spoke, almost demanded she take it, but the silence between them was too heavy. He left the food untouched and returned to his chores, each motion of pitchfork and bridle heavy with unspoken shame. That night, when he came to check the horses, the plate was empty. She did not look at him, but he saw her hands, no longer trembling with hunger. He said nothing, only nodded once and left her to the straw. The days bent slowly beneath the storm. Rowan began leaving small offerings, a blanket folded by the stall, an extra pair of gloves. He never watched her take them. Yet one evening, when he reached for his saddle, he found his torn glove mended with neat stitches, the work of careful hands. The gesture jolted him. It was not gratitude spoken aloud, but something more fragile, more binding. Their silence no longer felt like rejection. It was a waiting, a fragile bridge suspended over years of solitude. When Rowan rode into town for flour and salt, the judgment came swiftly. Men leaning on hitching posts eyed him with smirks. "Heard you've got company out there," one said, words dripping with mockery. Another muttered louder, "Cowboy's keeping himself a little Indian wife." Laughter broke the air, coarse and biting. Rowan felt the weight of every stare, every rumor. He wanted to shout that they were wrong, that they did not understand, but he knew it would only feed the fire. He bought what he needed and left, carrying not just supplies but the burden of their judgment. That night, back in the barn, he sat near the small fire, silent. She studied him across the flicker, her face calm yet knowing. "Do they call you less than a man too?" she asked at last. Her voice was soft but cut through him like a blade. He lifted his eyes, startled, and for the first time saw not just a stranger but someone who bore scars like his own. He nodded slowly, words failing. She said no more, but in her gaze he read recognition. The bond of two people cast outside the circle, bound not by choice but by the cruel arithmetic of a world that measured worth in blood and gossip. The fire cracked softly. Rowan found himself speaking in a voice he had not used in years. He told her of his boyhood, how his mother's death had left the house cold, how his father's silence had taught him to live without warmth. He spoke of years working cattle, drifting, always welcome to work but never to the tables where laughter was shared. She listened without interruption, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Then she spoke, halting at first, then steadier. She told of her husband, a hunter taken by fever the winter past, and how her people had scattered further each season, driven from land that once was theirs. She had wandered, seeking shelter, but found only closed doors. Her voice did not quaver, but in it Rowan heard a grief as wide as the snowfields. Their stories twined in the shadows like two wounded branches grafted together. It was not pity nor romance but recognition, a fragile thread tying their solitude into something shared. In the days that followed, their gestures grew bolder. Rowan repaired her broken moccasin, his clumsy stitching drawing a faint smile from her lips. She braided the mane of his horse, her slender hands patient, steady. They did not speak much, but moved in rhythm, feeding animals, mending tools, as if some unspoken household had begun to form. One evening, while brushing hay from his coat, Rowan noticed a strand of straw caught in her hair. Without thinking, he reached to brush it away. His hand lingered for a heartbeat, trembling. She did not pull back. That quiet moment lingered longer than any kiss could have. The storm deepened once more, a blizzard so fierce the barn shuddered beneath its weight. Outside, the world was swallowed in white. Inside, the fire crackled faintly, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and hay. Rowan drew her closer, not with demand but with the simple instinct of survival. Their breaths mingled, warmth exchanged in the fragile glow. "You're mine now," he whispered again, but his voice held no claim, only surrender. She met his gaze steadily, her eyes unflinching. "And you are mine," she said, the words carrying the weight of vow and mercy both. It was not passion that sealed them, nor ceremony, but the fierce, quiet knowledge that they had chosen to endure together. In the marrow of winter, two forsaken souls found belonging. When dawn broke, the storm had buried the town in silence. The barn still stood, the fire still glowed, and in that small pocket of warmth, Rowan and Ayanna sat side by side, watching the light slowly return. And though the world beyond would whisper, would sneer, would never fully understand, the truth belonged only to them. It was not a rescue nor a conquest, but a covenant stitched from hunger, shame, and grace. Perhaps the townsfolk would one day call it scandal or fate. But for Rowan it was neither. It was survival made tender, loneliness made whole. And if some unseen witness had stood in that barn, they would have seen not a cowboy and a widow, not scandal nor sin, but two lives refusing to remain undone. The snow outside lay heavy, but inside, something had shifted. The silence between them no longer waited, it promised. And if you too have ever felt cast adrift, remember this. Sometimes the place you fear as barren shelter is where winter ends, and where the quiet whisper becomes a beginning.